Good morning and welcome to the 31st meeting of the Local Government and Communities Committee. Can I ask you to please ensure all mobile phones are on silent, and just a reminder that broadcasting will operate your camera and microphone as usual. Please allow a short pause before being called on to speak to allow them to do so. Agenda item 1, we have consideration of whether to take agenda items 5, 6, 7 and 8 in private. Items 5 and 6 are consideration of the evidence heard today. Item 7 is consideration of our work programme, and item 8 is consideration of a draft letter to the convener of the Finance and Constitution on the impact of Brexit on devolution. As we are meeting remotely, rather than asking whether everyone agrees, I will instead ask if anyone objects. If there is silence, I will assume your consent. Does anyone object? In that case, I'll take that as acceptance, and that is agreed. Items 5, 6, 7 and 8 will be taken in private. Agenda item 2, the committee is taking evidence on the European Charter of Local Self-Government and Corporation Scotland Bill. And I welcome Aileen Campbell, Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government, Emily Callaghan, Solicitor, Jessica McPherson, Local Government Policy Team, and John Sinclair, Solicitor of the Scottish Government. Thank you all for being here today. For information, we've allocated just over an hour for this session, and we have a number of issues to discuss with you. Andy Whiteman, the member in charge, is also a committee member. Under the Parliament's standing orders, he will in effect take part in the evidence session as a non-committee member. This means I will only allow him to come in at the end for questions to panellists, time allows. Some brief technical information before we start. There is a pre-arranged questioning order, and I will call each member in turn to ask their questions for up to 9 minutes. Cabinet Secretary, please state clearly if an official is being brought in to answer any question. We may have a short amount of time for supplementary questions at the end. Please could everyone give broadcasting staff a second to operate your microphones before you speak. And I invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a short opening statement.
Good morning, thank you Convener, and good morning colleagues. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for inviting me to give evidence today and for the work that you've undertaken to date on this bill, and pay tribute to the work of Andy Whiteman in steering his proposals to this stage. In my opening remarks, I want to reaffirm the value the Scottish Government attached to the unique role of local government, a sphere of government that we respect. We are committed to local decision making that can be demonstrated by the ambitious legislation such as the Community Empowerment Act and the Islands Act, which signalled a significant transfer of powers to communities across Scotland. The historic Islands Act 2018 introduces the additional powers request regulations, which specifically enables relevant local authorities to request a transfer of responsibilities from Scottish ministers to them. You heard from COSLA President, Councillor Evison, during your evidence session, and I agree wholeheartedly with her when she says that we can achieve more for our communities when we work well together. And that is why developing and maintaining a close, constructive partnership between central and local government has always been a key priority of this government. And to give a sense of that partnership approach and to illustrate the influential role local government has, you need only to look at some of the current areas of success and mechanisms in place for joint working. So, for example, COSLA are co-signatories of the National Performance Framework, which sets out our shared ambitions for a successful and inclusive Scotland. We jointly launched the Local Governance Review as part of our shared commitment to subsidiarity and local democracy. And this creates an opportunity to promote the biggest shift of power since devolution. And we'll do this by ensuring decisions are taken as close as possible to those they affect most, something that I know that Councillor Evison is also really passionate about. COSLA are also key stakeholders at our table in our Cabinet subcommittee discussions on public sector reform. And in a really practical sense, I have regular bi-monthly meetings with the COSLA President, which provides a platform to discuss key issues of concern to local government. So these are just some examples of how local government plays a significant and inclusive role in the current decision-making process and governance in Scotland. Across all portfolios and all levels of government, ensuring local government's voice is heard and is firmly rooted in our policy development process. Indeed, that relationship and that partnership approach has also been critical in our response to COVID, so too our relationship with Solace, all of us focused on doing what we can to support the communities that we serve. However, I recognise that there can be challenges and there are times when we will not always agree. So if there is ever any more that we can do to continue to strengthen the relationship, then of course my Cabinet, my ministerial and colleagues and I are open and to considering that. Which brings us on to the reason why we're all here today, and I recognise that adopting the European Charter of Local Self-Government into domestic law might be one way of demonstrating our commitment to building a strong and lasting relationship with local government. So I met Andy Wightman yesterday and I appreciate the exchange that we had. As I explained in my memo and to Mr Wightman yesterday, the Scottish Government took a neutral position to this bill to allow for due diligence to be carried out, and I wanted to fully understand its implications and its practical application. And given it was a Members' Bill, that was not an unusual position. So I'm now pleased to advise the committee that officials have completed that analysis, and my Cabinet colleagues and I are satisfied that the Government can now express support for this bill. I know that Mr Wightman, COSLA and the many stakeholders who have an interest in the bill will be happy with that. There are some issues around the drafting, which I think some technical amendments would help to improve, but nothing of that is substantial. The principles of the bill are ones this Government support, and we will engage with local government, building on a strong platform of collaboration to cement our strong partnership and improve the lives of the people of Scotland. So thank you, Convener, and look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and thanks for stating the Government's position at this time. But you highlighted that the bill requests for a report every 5 years and the steps Scottish governments have taken to safeguard and reinforce local self-government and increase the autonomy of local authorities as a potential challenge. Can you explain further why this appears to be such a challenge, and is that something that you would be looking as one of the technical amendments in any way?
So I think it poses a potential challenge. I think the request for a report every 5 years is reasonable, but depending on when the report becomes due, it may be a challenge to properly show what the Government has been doing. So I don't think it's a significant issue, but it could be a challenge. But I think we believe that, on the whole, it strikes the right balance, but we just want to flag up at this stage that there could be issues in achieving that.
Okay, so you don't see that as being any stumbling block in any way. That's helpful to know. But the other thing that the bill does is it lends itself to financial independence, and we've recently heard from COSLA that local authorities' influence and effective governance has slowly been eroded over many years, with 60% of their funding directed and monitored by the Scottish Government. Can you tell us, first of all, if you agree with that figure, but how your local governance review, National Islands Plan, etc., will address this issue, and why you feel this bill will impact on the current plans that you already have?
So I think, as a government, we've always sought to remove ring fencing. That from the very start of this government coming into post, we've tried to enable there to be flexibility with local government finances, and I know that that's something that continues with the work of Kate Forbes, particularly around some of the flexibility that she's announced in direct response to COVID. More generally, we believe that the local governance review, the national island plans, are complementary to the aims that are being sought by the bill, namely to recognise and respect the role of local government and local decision making. The local government review, as I said in my opening remarks, was jointly launched between ourselves and COSLA, and that, I think, demonstrated a united front and a united approach to seek to try and rebalance power and to look at closely where decisions were made. So I would not accept the claim that local authorities' influence and effectiveness have been eroded. I would say, and I would argue quite the contrary. As I've said, across all portfolios local government is engaged with. Moreover, the National Performance Framework, as I've also said in my opening remarks, was jointly signed between the First Minister and the President of COSLA, and that symbolised a joint and shared aspiration and view about what type of country we want Scotland to be. I would also point to the fairly recent Social Renewal Advisory Board, the social renewal work that we are taking forward with COSLA active participants, along with Solace as well, ensuring that local government is involved and active in shaping the recovery from COVID. And as Cabinet Secretary with responsibility for local government, I do regularly engage and meet with COSLA to maintain our relationship, to work through the challenges that may arise. So the level of engagement, again, through and during COVID and in a response to Brexit, I think also underpins the foundations that we had in place to enable us to intensify that work together, to make sure that we were doing all we can to support our country's resilience now and in the future. So on a number of fronts, I think we engage really deeply and meaningfully with local government because we do respect the role that they have, and we can point to a number of examples of that. So That said, though, I think I conceded in my opening remarks as well that there will be challenges from time to time. There will be things and points of differences. But I would hope that the relationship that we've tried to create between ourselves and local government would enable us to navigate a path through some of that. But, I'm not going to, not recognise the calls that have been made to support this bill as well.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that put it in record that I was quoting COSLA. The last question I've got is around the costings of the bill. Your submission queried whether the costings for the bill were robust. Could you expand on that, and what do you think was missing from the financial memorandum that you would like to have seen there?
So I think again, why we had to take a bit of time to kind of look through the practical application of the bill, we wanted to make sure that in a financial sense that was also undertaken. And one of the biggest risks that we had was around the potential increase of legal challenge and the associated costs that would bring. So that was one area that we would point to where we had a concern about the robustness. But I guess as well, that said, listening to the respondents to the committee's work, we've also heard that that's something that people want to avoid more generally. So I think broadly speaking, the financial memorandum is fine, but we did have concerns around this potentially escalating legal costs, but that's something I don't think anyone wants to see happening, and certainly I don't think, having spoken to Andy, that I wouldn't want to put any words in his mouth. I think that's something that Andy Whiteman also wants to avoid as well.
Yeah, that did come across loud and clear from the witnesses that we heard from previously. Okay, Cabinet Secretary, thanks very much for that. Sarah Boyack, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just checking, yeah. Thank you very much. One of the main benefits of this bill has been suggested will be to deliver a parity between the Scottish Government and local government. I very much welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary is saying the Government will support this bill going forward. So would you agree with that key issue about the principle of the bill, which some of our witnesses said was very much a long overdue issue?
So I think I set out, we always, and as a matter of course, the government has always seen and viewed local government as another sphere of governance, democratically elected representatives that are there to serve their communities just like we are. So we've always viewed and valued and respected local government. And I've set out a number of ways in which we've sought to ensure that parity is there when we're developing our approaches, when we're taking forward policies, when we're engaging on new activities, for instance, the Social Renewal Advisory Board. We've always seen and viewed local government as being another sphere of governance that needed to also be involved, because the practical delivery of some of the things we want to achieve are done through local government. So it's in all of our interests, and I think Councillor Evison would have conceded that as well. It's in all of our evidence. It's in all of our benefit for us to be working well together. But we also heed the calls of what others have said about this, more formalising that relationship, more within legislation, giving it a legislative underpinning about that parity. So again, that's why we've arrived at the position that we've had, to make sure that we can use this now as a platform to further improve the relationship that we have with local government and to embed that in legislation.
Yeah, that's very much welcome, the acceptance of that principle. In your opening remarks, Cabinet Secretary, you said that there were issues where you felt there were drafting amendments that were required. So you're happy with the principles of the bill. Can you give us examples of the key areas where you think the bill needs to be recrafted before it's something you would support at stage 3?
Yeah, so we've had I had a discussion yesterday with Andy Whiteman around some of the drafting, and again, I would point out that we had said that there were no substantial changes that we would be seeking to make, but more around the technical drafting. And it may be that can be resolved, and our bill teams have resolved and have undertook to kind of work together to try and talk through the interpretations and whether or not that can be resolved. So, for instance, Section 3, the duty to promote local government, we were just looking for a bit of clarity on the timing and laying and publishing of reporting. In subsection 3 of that, about who is to assess, who is to be consulted. So there are just things like that, and I hope that gives a kind of sense that it's not showstoppers, if you see what I mean. It's not about us wanting to make substantial changes, but around the technical draft and the clarity and whether or not we can improve upon that. And we flagged that up to Andy Whiteman yesterday in our meeting. And like I say, our teams have undertaken the action to work together to try and work through some of that. Is that okay?
Yes,
Sorry,
I was really trying to...
There was a rustle. I wasn't sure if I was hearing something else.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify whether there were any issues of principle, and if you could just give us a steer on the kind of areas where you felt the drafting needed to be improved, whether it was in terms of clarity or whether there was a political issue where you wanted a slightly different flavour in the bill.
No, like I say, it's more in that in the kind of line of what I've just outlined, some kind of points of clarity, points of drafting, nothing to change the purpose, but some things that I think can either be done through amendment and working together, or can be resolved by us making sure that we've got a very crisp and clear understanding of the intention from Andy Whiteman's team.
Okay, thank you. One of the issues was raised by Professor Chris Hemsworth, and he was suggesting that there was an issue about it wasn't just a relationship between the Scottish Government and local government that needed to be given parity, but there was also an issue about other Scottish government bodies responsible to the Scottish Government where he felt it might be appropriate to have an amendment. Is that something you have considered or would consider?
I don't think at this stage, I don't think we would be looking to further expand that. I think the scope and the coverage of the bill is fine from our perspective. But that said, though, the bill will enable us to work with our partners to make sure that we're all of our agencies and all of public life are geared up to recognise the bill. So I think at the moment the scope and the terms are fine. I don't believe that we feel that we need to extend that further. But as others have said, I think witnesses that you've had, that this will change our culture. And, so what do we do then? We need to make sure that we're working across all of our agencies to make sure that they're supported and geared up for the legislation.
Yeah, that's very helpful. It just in our evidence session, Professor Chris Hemsworth, Professor Caroline Reform Scotland all thought that issue should be explored. So I think it would be good to explore when we hit stage 2 of the discussions on this bill, if we're agreed on the general principles. Thank you. The other
I think
thing...
also we had witnesses that didn't say that and didn't agree with that position either. So I guess we can further work through that, and of course you'll take that. The committee will take a view and report upon it. But
that's why I wanted to test it with you, Cabinet Secretary, because in one of our witness sessions, the three people that we were taking evidence from all thought that was a good idea that should be further explored, which is why I wanted to test it with you this morning. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. Alexander Stewart.
Good morning, Convener, thank you, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. In your preamble, you talked about encouraging and being supportive of local government as a key sector and the partnership working that's going on, and I'm very encouraged by that, Cabinet Secretary. But can I ask, to what extent can the Scottish Government prove that it has complied with the Charter to date?
So we already believe that we already do act in compliance with the legislation, and I've set out a number of areas of work where we are working jointly with COSLA, with local government, to make sure that their views, their experience, their role as a sphere of government are reflected in the policies that we take forward. So I could point to a number of areas of policy where we work very well and jointly with local authorities. So I've already mentioned the local governance review jointly launched between ourselves and COSLA, the National Performance Framework jointly signed by the First Minister along with the President of COSLA. That in itself pretty symbolic in itself about how we collectively want to see the direction of our country take. In my own portfolio, asylum seeking policy has also been really well worked with COSLA. We've jointly published things, for instance, around guidance on no recourse to public funding. So again, taking issues that are, have a degree of a reserved nature, but working together, working collectively, so we know that we can pool our efforts together to better enhance the provision and support for people who are particularly vulnerable. So similarly with the work that's been going on around Gypsy Traveller community and our homeless community, again, Councillor Whittam and Kevin Stewart working together very effectively to try and make sure that we can take the right actions around that particular issue. And in other portfolios, I know when I was in public health, we worked together with local government around the shared priorities for public health and jointly have worked on the delivery of that, and I know that that's work that continues now. So in a range of areas across a range of portfolios, I would argue that we do work well with local government. We do work in compliance with the legislation, with the charter as before it becomes or looks to become incorporated in domestic law here, and policy decisions are better for that.
And I would agree with that, Cabinet Secretary, because I think you've talked about the further local devolution that you want to see for local government going forward. But at the moment, because it's not enshrined in legislation, have there been any constraints that have happened because the Charter is not enshrined in legislation that you can see so far?
No, I don't think so. The Charter places an emphasis on consultation and agreement, and I think that's what we do already. But again, we are not blind to the evidence that you as a committee have had as well, which sees our colleagues in local government seeking to formalise that and underpin that with legislation. So, but I think the question is around any barriers or have we been constrained? I don't think so.
Good. And we've heard from some witnesses that they believe that the proposal should be extended to other public bodies. And do you have any views to think that that is of benefit, having the Charter extended onto other public bodies?
No, not at this time. But I understand from Sarah Boyack's line of questioning that that's perhaps something that the committee are seeking to explore further. But I believe that the Charter and the bill are primarily about the relationship between central and local government and where it places a duty on the government to act compatibly with the Charter. So I believe at this point in time the scope is right, but again, that will be up to the committee and reflection of what Sarah Boyack also asked me in a similar question, that that's something that you might want to further explore. But from our perspective, I think the scope's fine.
And about strengthening it, because this is all about strengthening the outcomes that we have and strengthening the democracy. So do you think that the compliance will strengthen outcomes for local democracy review? Is that an objective that you see from this legislation?
I think the bill will complement the local governance review. The joint local governance review that we took forward and have been taken forward and continue to work, although it's been disrupted somewhat by COVID, I think is really an exciting opportunity to shift the balance of power. And there were some kind of timely moments of it. It was around the time of 20 years after devolution, so that gave us a milestone by which we would want to kind of think through: is that current structure, is that the right one? Is the decision making made in the right places, and what do we do to try and make sure it reflects the needs of Scotland in the here and now? So we're also looking to, and COSLA ourselves are looking to work with our communities as well, to try and work through about what do we need to do to enable our communities to feel a greater sense of empowerment and the ability to take more decisions for themselves. And I think, again, the last 9 months have shown just what communities can do when they're given the tools and support to be able to cope with something as traumatic as a pandemic, by looking after people and feeling that they have the agency to be able to do that as well. So once some of the restrictions ease, and when we're a wee bit further through some of the health measures that are in place, then we'll be able to kind of re-embark upon that desire to see some of our communities further empowered. And it was something we set out in our programme for government as well. But this undoubtedly will complement that, which is a shorter way to answer you probably.
Thank you, Convener. I'm content with that.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. Keith Brown, please.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. First off, just very quickly, Cabinet Secretary, on the submission from the Scottish Government, it mentions that the UK ratified the Charter in 1998, and so the Government is bound to comply with it. Maybe an old-fashioned view these days on complying with international treaties, I suppose, but it does also say the Scottish Government's interpretation of the bill is that it places a duty on Scottish ministers to act compatibly with the Charter articles. I just wonder if I'm missing something between the Government currently being bound to comply with it and the bill trying to make them act compatibly with it. Is there a distinction there that's perhaps lost on me?
So, do you mean, or do we believe that this is required for us?
Well, I'm just looking at your submission. It says that the Scottish Government is bound to comply with it. It says that in the submission.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, I think the Scottish Government is saying that what the bill seeks to do is to make sure ministers act compatibly with it. I just wonder if there's a distinction between what you currently accept as being the Government is bound to comply with it, and what the bill seeks to achieve, which seems to be to act compatibly. Maybe there's no distinction there, but it just seems to me, why is it trying to achieve something that's already there?
Yeah, I guess from the outset, we've always believed that we've acted compatibly with the bill and with the legislation, and we have always sought to adhere to the principles there by, for instance, all the different activities that we've outlined around different policies, different approaches, different portfolios, all engaging in making sure that we are acting in compliance with the legislation. But I suppose what's different about this is the call from COSLA, others, people who you've taken evidence from, in fact, Andy Whiteman himself, about this giving it a statutory formal footing in domestic law. I mean, it probably is something that's unusual bit of legislation to be kind of incorporating, but I think, on the whole, I think, the principles by which the principles underpinning the legislation are ones that we are comfortable with because we already comply with them. So I suppose the formal footing and the more legislative underpinning of it is in domestic law is the real difference.
Thanks for that. I just wonder though, we've heard, as you said, a variety of views from different people, and certainly people I speak to in local government veer from the point that this is pretty irrelevant to the issues which they think face local government. It's not going to make any real difference, and much of the evidence we've heard says it's not going to have a huge effect. To the other side, where people think it becomes just a charter for endless legal disputes between different tiers of government, especially coming to head at pre-election times, people trying to score points, which can be very expensive. And given the fact that both local governments and the Scottish Government are currently pretty hedged around by different bodies that examine what they do, or they do things at one remove through ALIOs or public sector bodies, well, would you go along with either of those, that it's pretty pointless because it's pretty toothless in its effect, or that it could be something that does have a point and will be quite detrimental to a proper working relationship between the two tiers of government? I just wonder if, two spheres of government, I should say. I just wonder if you've got a view on those things.
So, our view is that we act compatibly now with local government, and that and I would argue, despite I know that you've had some views to the contrary in your evidence, I would say that on the whole our relationship with local government is pretty good, and that we will undoubtedly from time to time have differences of opinion, different viewpoints, but on the whole, in my engagement and across the government, our engagement is fairly positive. And again, that fairly solid relationship has been essential during the course of the last 9 months, where that relationship had to intensify. The regularity of what we did and how we responded meant that we had to work very closely together, and that includes also Solace as well. So I think, we would always have worked on the assumption that we were compliant with the Charter and that our relationship was good. But again, the other thing we can't ignore either is the fact that the colleagues in local government have said that they feel that this legislative underpinning and legislative articulation of the respect of local government is something that is important to give more focus to the relationship, to give more focus to the sense of parity between the two spheres of government, and so we also, I would hope, that take heart from the fact that nobody, regardless of whether you're in local government or national government, is looking or seeking to make this something that is where decisions are challenged routinely, where there are big barneys in the courts, or legal wranglings or expensive cases. I don't think that's what anyone wants with this legislation. It's certainly not what I've heard from Andy Whiteman himself. It's not what I've heard from your witnesses, and it's certainly something that we don't want, and was one of these things that we wanted to flag up as a risk around the cost and the escalation of that, and one of these things that we had to check out across the whole of government as well. So my hope would be that we do use this, and I suppose it depends on how we choose to use this moment. Do we choose to make it something that can further strengthen our relationship? Then I would hope that we could, and it would be certainly the thing that I would hope to use with local government to demonstrate again our commitment to them. But there's risk. Risk with anything. I'm just saying there is risk. I'm just saying there will be risk with everything like this. But I think how it's been framed by the folk that have come to give you evidence, the fact that we don't want this to end up being something that's caught up in the courts, I think that has to give us a sense of reassurance that this is about strengthening the relationship between the two spheres of government, and I think our communities will benefit from that.
My last question really is, one of the comments we heard from COSLA was that not to do this would leave Scotland as an outlier along with Hungary. Pretty unfavourable comparison. However, if this does get through to becoming law, then the rest of the UK will be the outlier, which COSLA didn't really seem too concerned about. But I just wonder, I think we also heard from Dr. Himsworth that he thought not only should other public bodies be incorporated in this, as has been mentioned by both Alexander Stewart and Sarah Boyack, but the UK government should be involved in this as well. It should make it a genuine different spheres of government. And I know you can't answer for the UK government, but I just wonder if you feel that would be an anomaly if we were to incorporate this and other parts of the UK hadn't done so.
Well, I suppose if we move and the bill goes through the process of a bill through the Parliament, and we're the only UK nation that has that in place, then that will mean that there is a different approach in Scotland compared to the rest. But I guess that it's in Scotland that we've got the bill proposed. It's in Scotland that we've got our local authorities, umbrella body COSLA, looking for the legislation. So I suppose as it progresses, then we can see if the UK has any position on it. But I'm focused on making sure that the relationship between the Scottish government and local government is as good as it can be, and that's where my focus is at the moment. And I guess it would be up to the UK government to determine whether or not they feel that they're acting always in compliance with the legislation with their local government authorities. And, you know, I feel quite reassured that despite some of the concerns that have been raised around the work and the relationship between local government and Scottish government, I actually feel that we're in not a bad place. And that has been, I think, demonstrated over the last 9 months in particular, and the close contact that we've had to have. So my focus is on that relationship. If that puts us at odds with the rest of the UK, then I guess that's just a consequence of us taking our different approaches, and that's a consequence of devolution, that we get to take our own decisions.
Just finally to say, I very much agree with what you say about the way local governments responded during the pandemic. They've done a fantastic job working with the Scottish Government. But that's all my questions. Thanks very much, Convener.
Thank you very much, Keith. Gail Ross, please.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, CABSEC. We heard from Professor Kearley that he said that some of the different views expressed in the earlier consultation may well resurface, and one of the significant ones that people really couldn't agree on was whether or not there should be the post created of a commissioner. I just wondered what your and the Scottish Government views are on that.
So I think we kind of felt that we agreed, and we were in the same place as the majority of the consultation responses, including I believe COSLA, and I believe also Andy Whiteman himself, though I wouldn't seek to prejudge his views. But I don't believe that we feel that a commissioner is required. Excuse me, sorry, Gail and Convener, I've just got something that's cropped up on my screen. I'm just going to have to take it down. Sorry. There was a gremlin in my screen there, so I just wanted to make sure that I got that sorted. Apologies. Yes, so no, we don't.
When you're on committee.
Not you're not reading it.
So yes, so sorry for that, interrupting my train of thought. No, we don't believe that there's a need for a commissioner.
Okay, thanks. I don't really have much else. The one thing I wanted to ask you, and it's more of a general subject, but it did come up with Councillor Evison about encouraging more people from diverse backgrounds to stand for local government, and she was of the opinion that this bill may help in some way. And I mean, obviously, I would be delighted if it did encourage more diversity in elected membership in local government. Do you see it happening? And I suppose the wider question is, how do we ensure that it does help? How do we encourage more diversity in elected membership in local government?
Thank you for that question. And so if I'm honest, if I would ask people what's the barrier to them taking part in elected life, I don't think that the answer is always, or has been ever, the fact that we've not incorporated the Charter. So I think the way that you framed the question is right, is that how do we then, if this bill does progress, how do we use that as a chance to kind of increase participation? Because I think that's something that we all want to see happening. So I don't think it hasn't been something that's been raised with me, and that's anecdotal, and it could be that it's different for others. But that has never been something that's been raised as the thing that is putting people off. But I think if we choose to use it in a positive sense, then it could help with that. But I think it's more important that we're encouraging diversity across political parties doing what they can, that there is mentoring, that there is networking happening. These things that I know in particular for women that Councillor Evison cares very strongly about and has done a lot of work at COSLA on to try and encourage more people to stand for local government. You know, you and I in a particular position ourselves, we're both not seeking re-election next year. So I think we'll both also have our views about what other things need to change in political discourse, debate, how we respond to the particular challenges of family life, and a whole host of other things about not just local government, what needs to change in local government, what needs to change across all of our elected arenas in order to encourage a more diverse range of people to enter into politics. And if we do achieve that, then that is better for our communities. It's better for our constituents. It's better for the country more generally, because then we've got something that's far more reflective at every sphere of government, much more reflective of what community in our society is like. So I think it'll take more than just this to be able to improve diversity. But, I think if we choose to use it wisely, then it gives us another way to encourage more diversity in local government. And, and we'll need to work on the national parliament as well.
Thank you very much. That's me, convener. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Annie Wells, please.
Thanks, convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I've only really got a couple of questions. The first one being, did the Scottish Government see any potential sanctions for non-compliance, and what would they be? And if there's to be any sanctions beyond the declaration of incompatibility?
Is that you? Sorry.
Yeah, that's the first one. Sorry.
So I don't believe there is a need for sanctions. If a declaration of incompatibility is made, then it would be necessary to deal with it.
Perfect. And just the final question, because most of my points have been covered already. Does the Scottish Government have any concerns around cost implications, particularly if the principles of the Charter are already being adhered to?
So I've talked about how we have concerns, and we've raised concerns, and we've talked about them a bit more, reassured by some of what has been said in previous evidence sessions around the legal potential legal cost. So that would be, it remains a thing that we just need to be mindful of. But we would also need to make sure that if there is a new bit of legislation, if this goes through Parliament and is adopted, then we would also need to make sure that we, I suppose, provide material support to make sure that folk are geared up for it, and training and all sorts of things like that. So that would be a cost, but I think the biggie would be the potential cost and risk around the legal challenge. And like I say, I think I think I said in a previous answer that we're broadly content with the financial memorandum, but wanted to flag up that issue around legal costs.
Yeah, thanks very much, Cabinet Secretary. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you, Annie. Andy, do you have any comments, any questions you'd like to ask the Cabinet Secretary?
Thanks, convener. No, I don't have any questions, but I welcome the government's support for the bill.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, that completes our questions and concludes this evidence session. Thank the Cabinet Secretary and our officials for taking part. The committee will take closing evidence from the member in charge on 9th of December and report to Parliament early in 2021. Members of the panel can leave the meeting, of course, by pressing the red telephone icon. I now suspend briefly to allow a witness changeover. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. At item 3, the committee has taken evidence on post-legislative scrutiny of the Community Empowerment Act 2015, parts 3 and 5. Today we are taking evidence from 3 community organisations which participated in the committee's survey of the Act. We're keen to explore some of the issues you raised, and I welcome Peter Scott, Planning Representative, Cramond and Barnton Community Council, Ian Hamlin, Secretary of Friends, Stevenson Conservation, and Mary Peart, Secretary of Community Out West Trust. Thank you all for being here today. We've just done over an hour for this session, and before we start, we've got some brief technical information. This is a pre-arranged questioning order, and I will call each member in turn to answer questions for up to 9 minutes. It would help broadcasting if members could indicate who in the panel their questions are addressed to. We may have a short amount of time for supplementary questions at the end. As there are 3 panellists, please indicate clearly if you wish to answer the question, for instance by raising your hand, and don't feel the need to answer every question if your views are generally in line with points already made or the question hasn't been aimed at you. Please, could everyone give broadcasting staff a second to operate your microphones before you speak? Thank you, and we will now move on to the questions. Firstly, could each of you tell me about your community and what your organisation is trying to achieve? What you think are the big challenges facing your communities or organisations? Happy to take anyone that wishes to start. Mr. Scott?
Yep. Yes, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to give evidence this morning. Challenges to our community include large numbers of housing developments on the periphery of our community, which are putting huge pressures on the local transport networks and really causing us issues with trying to get decent traffic management solutions to these issues. That's part of the reasons that we've been trying to get good engagement with the City Council to try and solve some of the traffic management issues. Other issues include quite a lot of elderly people needing services. It's often thought that an affluent community like ourselves doesn't have any needs, but we certainly do have needs for medical and social and care services. We've also got the issues of people coming into the area that we need to service because we have a lot of visitors coming to use the waterfront at Cramond, using Camel Park, etc. And that gives us problems of traffic congestion, more traffic issues. I'll leave it at that.
So what are your organisation trying to achieve then?
We're trying to achieve, I suppose, we're trying to reduce some of the issues that we see, issues of parking, issues of traffic congestion on the main traffic networks through our area. We're trying to provide community services. At the moment, we have limited facilities for community meetings, etc. We have a lot of voluntary work being undertaken to help maintain the environment in our area. There are needs to upgrade toilets, public toilets, for example, in some of the resort parts of the area. And we just want to try and engage the community and help it to liaise with the City Council and to make the services at the City Council work on our behalf.
Okay, thank you for that. Mary Peart, could you please?
Hi there. The challenges we've got in our area really is the closure of facilities, or the lack of facilities for the local community, and the many visitors that we get coming into the area. So we set ourselves up just coming up to 2 years ago to take over a set of local public toilets that were going to be closed, that were closed by the Home Council. So we've done that, and since then we're trying to get funding for further developing that to provide some camper van hookups, some other facilities, some camper van waste disposal units for the many tourists, but hopefully so that would provide sustainable funding for the community toilets. So just in a small way, that's what we're trying to do in our area.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for that. And Ian Hamlin.
Yep. Well, our group has a reasonably specific remit in that we deal with community green spaces. We try to improve them along various dimensions, and we try to protect them too. And it's the latter issue of protecting community green spaces that is also a big issue in the community. I mean, we've lost our playing fields. We're in the process of losing public parks and other wild green spaces in the town. So there's a huge rate of loss of community green spaces, and this obviously has a terrible impact in the town in various ways, and we devote a lot of time to try to stop this from happening.
Okay, so how would you describe an empowered community, and do you feel your communities are sufficiently empowered to make the changes that you've all spoke about your area needs? And I suppose, given that you're on screen, Ian, if you would like to answer that first.
Yeah, I guess an empowered community is one that has influence, one that can genuinely have decision-making power over the big things that happen in the community. I mean, I think the community does have influence over small things that happen. For example, the council did a consultation a year or two ago about which flower beds should be maintained and which abandoned. So in that sense, there is a certain amount of power over the small things, but that's not really what's of great interest to the community. They're interested in the big issues and the big money that gets spent in their community. And we have almost zero power over that. I mean, I have no hesitation to say that we have almost zero power over the big decisions. There's a certain facade, a certain act of public consultations and council community working groups and all kinds of community empowerment processes that take place, when there are big plans on the table. But these tend to be just for show, because anytime the community is at odds with the council never budges. So I'd say that the community is lacks empowerment in the extreme, I would say.
It's interesting. I'm sure that my colleagues are going to come on and question you further on that subject matter. But Peter, Scott, would you like to come in at this stage?
Yes, I see empowerment as really the ability of the community to be heard and to influence, as my colleague said, to influence decision making in the City Council and other public agencies, and also to be able to get support for any initiatives that we put forward. We have been we are now part of two community participation requests, one on traffic management issues at a local and strategic level, and the other part of a joint community participation request by 5 community councils in our area, which is basically the result of over the last 6 years or so, the council changing the way and the structures through which it engages with the community. First of all, there were neighbourhood partnerships, then there were locality committees, now there are neighbourhood networks. And we still remain unclear as to how the latest of these structures is supposed to work. There keep being changes of staff, responsibility.
I think some of my colleagues are going to be asking you particularly around about those areas. So
okay,
maybe I can move on at this stage and then give them a chance to ask you in more detail later on. So Mary Pearce, could I have your view on what an empowered community looks like?
I mean, for us, an empowered community is one that takes responsibility and doesn't just sit back and sort of complain about things, but does something about it. I mean, we're quite a small group. We haven't been around for too long, so to say that it's a fully empowered community would be going a bit far, but it has been encouraging. It has, people have been excited by what has been achieved, and there is a sort of a coming together of the community, and there's also, I talked to other groups, and they're now looking at it as a way forward for some of the other problems, some of the other toilets in the area. Maybe we've sort of shown the way in our community, I think.
So you're seeing a growing empowerment in your group, and you think that may be the sort of example that others can follow?
I think we've shown what's possible, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, listen, thanks very much for that. Sarah Boyack.
Thank you very much, Convener. Welcome to all the witnesses today, and really good to hear your opening remarks. I'd be very keen to follow them up, and it's that issue. I'm going to start off with Peter. The Convener told you to wait until somebody else asked the question, but I would like to ask about the relationship with local authorities, because it was one of the things that came up in the workshops we had with a lot of community groups, is about how you access the right person within the local authority or a public body. Do you know who to contact? Is it clear? Peter, you said that you'd had neighbourhood partnerships, localities, and now networks. Is there something about the people you need to contact? Is it the structures or is it the culture? First off with Peter, and then I'll go on to the other two witnesses. Thanks.
It is the structures for one thing, and we've had to ask the Transport Service for an organogram just so that we understand just who does what, and we're still waiting for that. The responsibilities keep being changed, and we keep being told that we're going through another change, so we just don't know who we're dealing with. That's one issue. The culture is another one. A culture sometimes of listening but not being heard, of intransigence and procrastination. We keep thinking that we're getting somewhere, and then another study comes along of roads issues or whatever, and we just never make any progress. We have got some good relations with individual officers. There's a lot happening with voluntary work on the environmental issues in one of the local nature reserves on the River Amman, for example. And we get on well with them at a local level. It's when we try and get through to headquarters or try and have any influence on real decision making at the higher level with the committees and with decisions on planning issues or on traffic issues, we just seem to get nowhere.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask Mary Peart, what is the experience you've got with the Out West Trust? Is it the access into the council? Is it knowing who to contact, or is it the culture?
I think we were very lucky because we were solving a bit of a problem for the Highland Council. So we found the whole process actually remarkably easy. We were lucky because there's a special team, a special CAT, Community Asset Transfer team. I phoned up one day just sort of with a vague idea that maybe we could take the toilets over, and it was brilliant from that moment on. They were very, very helpful, very supportive. It was just in contrast to everything else I've been hearing. They worked with us. They got the amenities. We also had to work with the amenities department, and they chivied them along and got them on board with us. So it's just been easy. But as I say, that is because we were solving a particular problem that the Highland Council has of a bad reputation for closing toilets. So it was a win-win situation, really. But we met with nothing but encouragement.
Thank you. So that's a good culture and a straightforward process for you. So we could learn from that.
And fantastic team to work with. Really, really enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Hamlin, do you have any insights on that issue about access, knowledge of who to contact, and the culture? And have you also had contact not just with the local authority, but with other public sector bodies, or is it primarily the local authority you've been in touch with, Mr. Hamlin?
Yeah, well, I think we don't, as an organisation, have much trouble identifying or accessing people. We've been around for an awful long time, so we're well acquainted with who does what in the council. Our problem really is influencing the council on big decisions. I think when the council has a big plan up their sleeve, they just don't want to be influenced, and that's the big problem that we have. When it comes to other public bodies, we have liaised with SNH and SEPA on a few things. I don't think we've necessarily had trouble accessing the right people. We don't really have much success influencing them either. But, so access isn't really the issue. It tends to be actually influencing people. That's the killer.
Right. So from two organisations, it's not getting the result. It's not the difficulty of getting in, it's getting the right result. And then the experience in Community Out West is actually a good relationship and good results. For those of you who've done participation requests, are there your recommendations for how things should change? It's not the participation request so much as the outcome from the participation request? Am I right, Mr. Hamlin? Do you want to follow on that line of questioning first?
Yeah, I think in a sense there's nothing wrong with the participation request process. It would be entirely reasonable if public bodies were willing to be influenced. But what strikes me as perhaps something that's wrong with the participation requests is there doesn't seem to be anything in the legislation that actually gives community power. All it does is it allows the community to speak to public bodies. It doesn't actually give them any power at all. And therefore, the whole system, I don't think, would work unless public bodies have a great aspiration to give away power to communities, which I don't think they do.
Thank you. And can I follow up with Peter Scott there, because you had both major strategic issues in terms of transport, which was the impact of transport coming in to your area, but also you had quite a few issues in terms of supporting older people and access to social care. In terms of your participation requests, did you get the outcomes you wanted? And is it the process or that question that Mr. Hamlin's just mentioned about the power relationship? Where do you think the shift needs to come? And that's a question to Peter Scott.
We had problems with the process, which I can go into, but at the moment I'm very limited in what I can say about the success or not of it. We have had 2 meetings, substantive meetings on the traffic management issues. The joint community participation request by the 5 councils, the community councils, has only just started and they've not even had the first meeting yet. The process is problematic that we found. We have never had a formal decision notice. We asked over and over again for an outcome improvement process as the Act suggests. We then got 3 generic objectives for such a process, which were just short paragraphs, and we ended up putting back to the council what we thought an outcome improvement process should look like, which included timetables, people that we wanted to be involved, key stages, etc. This was not what we received from the council to start with and what we thought that the Act required of them, or the guidance required of them. We had problems at the start because our request got lost on a couple of occasions because of an IT glitch. And we were wondering at that stage, well, look, if the council's just ignoring this, who do we appeal to? And I think appeals are quite important. You might want to follow that one up. So the process has not been ideal. Whether other community participation requests by other organisations have the same process problems, I'm not sure, but certainly we've not found it ideal. And certainly there's also issues with the reporting process. We have never been able to find, apart from with it hidden away in amongst a committee report any reports of previous participation requests to the council.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a time for a quick supplementary, convener?
It'd have to be very brief, Sarah, and just to one member.
I suppose it was just to then ask that follow-up question to Mr. Scott. It's a yes or no. Do you think the relationship between the community and local authority has changed as a result of your participation requests?
Far too early to ask. We have got some good relationships now with some of the officers, but whether we will get the outcomes that we're looking for remains to be seen.
Thank you very much, convener, and thank you, Mr. Scott.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Annie Wells.
Thanks, convener, and good morning, panel. I'd just like to sort of follow on from Sarah Boyack's question and just pick up on something that Mr. Scott had said with regards to an appeal process. I was just wondering if he could sort of identify to us which body or bodies should be responsible for assessing appeals, should there be any.
The community participation request has been made to. We wondered whether the Scottish Public Authorities Ombudsman was the right person, but we don't really know. It's got to be basically independent, and it's got to have a mediation role. I think that's about all I can say, really.
And could I ask Mr. Hamill the same question, just frame it slightly differently, just to ask if he believes there should be an appeal process for participation requests?
Well, yeah, I think definitely. I guess there might be two kinds of appeals process. One is if you're not happy with the actual process itself, or your participation request has been rejected, or you feel it's not being handled appropriately, then yeah, I mean, it's a good idea to get to have an appeals process. But I think there's a different type of appeal which would be even more useful, which is that if you don't agree with the outcome of the improvement process, then you have the opportunity to actually appeal to an independent body. And of course, this goes beyond participation requests. I think at any point in time, if a community is at loggerheads with a local authority over an issue, then it would be good to have an external appeals process, so an external body can make a determination. At the moment, the only people in the equation that have any power is the council. They have absolute power, and that's not a very healthy environment for good decision making. So some kind of external body who can intervene on contentious issues would obviously be highly desirable.
Can I just follow up with yourself, Mr. Hamill, just on Sarah Boyack's question she asked Mr. Scott? Has the relationship between the community and local authority changed as a result of a participation request at any point?
Well, I think the only two participation requests submitted to our local authority are the two that on the same issue that my group put in and the Community Council put in parallel. So we're the only two requests, and it's had a negative effect, i.e. the requests have not led to any improvement. They've not led to anything at all. So it's one more example in a long series of having no effect on anything. So in that sense, it's just one more nail in the coffin, really, and it's been a negative thing rather than a positive thing.
Thanks very much for that. And my sort of a final question is for Mary Peart. Although your organisation hasn't had to submit a participation request up till now, how confident do you feel about influencing decisions made on behalf of your community? I noted you said you had a good relationship with the local authority, so I wonder if you could answer that for me, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we've thought of at this stage, and I think the nature of our body is it's not necessarily something that would be an obvious way forward. But yeah, you do feel listened to. Certainly, the people I've worked with so far, they listen to you. They have you have a good conversation. Yeah, I would be more than ready to give it a try. But as I say, I'm not sure that it's something that is likely to be necessary in our area, in the field that we're working in at the moment.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you, Annie. Gail Ross, please.
Thanks, convener. Good morning, panel. Thanks for joining us. I want to start with Mary. She probably won't be surprised about that. Mary, I'm really delighted to hear that your experience with the council has been good, and I know we chatted about it at some length during the workshops. But has there been anything with any other groups that you have found to be negative? Because I believe that the council isn't the only organisation that you've had to have contact with.
You know, the minor negatives were sorted out very quickly with that. It's since then that we're trying to develop the site. We've got an RTIF grant application in at the moment, and that's we have a bit of a problem emerging with SEPA, who are a sort of a broad brush, making a broad brush decision on the site without actually looking at it specifically. But that isn't strictly on the asset transfer. That's about planning and moving forward. But even there, we've got support from various bodies.
I think that there is a lesson in, though, that, you know, we were talking before with other bodies and organisations about what we saw is maybe the lack of interest of community bodies coming forward, and what could be learned from the ones that had been, learned just in general from ones that have been successful and ones that maybe hadn't been so successful. And I think that it probably is a lesson to say that, you know, it is a big undertaking. So it's not just the initial asset transfer that you have to go through. You know, there's a lot more that goes on behind that, and, you know, afterwards and stuff as well. So that's really interesting to hear that, and hopefully we can get it sorted out.
Hopefully.
So I'm going to open this up to our other two panelists as well. I know that at the workshop, one of the big bits of feedback that we got was that the legislation is good, but there's possibly a lack of awareness of the legislation itself, and maybe then deeper in how it actually works in practice. And that was applied to members of the public, community groups, but also to members and officers of local authorities. How did your group first think about doing this, Mary, and using the Community Empowerment Act? Where did that idea start off?
And had been trying to get the Highland Council to keep the toilets open, and they were told, absolutely no, if you want them open, you'll have to do an asset transfer. So that was how we heard about it, and then, you know, we sat and talked about it and thought, let's go for it. But that was how we found out about it.
Okay, Ian, how about your group? How did you start first thinking that you could use the Act?
Well, every couple of weeks I read the Scottish Community Alliance website, and they had an article about participation requests, so I thought, well, give that a shot, and I told the Community Council about it and suggested they do the same thing. So we just start, as it were, advertised on sort of Scottish community web presence, as it were.
And how did you find the initial process of the knowledge of the Act within the authority?
Good question. We put in requests and we heard back from them, so they must have either known or taught themselves what it was, and they followed the appropriate steps. The process is obviously a bit shaky, and there are delays, but that's to be expected, I think, working with local authorities. So yeah, they followed the process well, but I don't think they want to buy into the most important aspect of the process, which is being influenced. So maybe they don't understand they're supposed to be influenced. Maybe they think it's just one more one more thing that they've got to kind of nod when the communities come along and just placate them. Maybe they don't appreciate they're supposed to actually be more influenced via participation requests than they usually are.
And did you have to deal with one specific officer in the council, or another thing that was brought up in the workshops was that some people had to deal with different departments, different officers, and then they ended up having to explain themselves several times about their aims and objectives and all that. And it was mentioned that perhaps a specific officer in each public authority to deal with this, or at least to have the knowledge and experience, so they were the prime person to deal with. Do you think that would have been helpful, or did that happen in your case?
I think it must have happened. I mean, we submitted a form. I can't remember where to, but it obviously went to the right people. And we must have got an interim email that said, thank you for your request. What's going to happen next is X, Y, and Z. And then we got pointed to the council manager who was going to be liaising with us as part of, not a community empowerment individual, but the actual man who is working in the project that we're interested in. And we got sent to him. So the process seemed to go smoothly.
And at what point do you think you realised that maybe it was starting to not go so smoothly? Was there an individual point, or did it just kind of fall by the wayside in bits and bobs?
Yeah, it didn't really fall by the wayside. I mean, it had a conclusion. So what we did was both organisations, Community Council and ourselves, in parallel, went through the process. We met with the relevant people and discussed things with them. We gathered information from them, and based on our meeting and the information we had gathered from the relevant people in the council, we reached a position, and we put our respective positions across to the council, and the positions were ignored is not the right word, because they would have read our emails, but they were not influenced by our positions. The same way that if the council does a community consultation, or there's a community petition, or there's a community council working group, whatever process happens, it produces an output, i.e. a community representation, and that output has no influence. So we went through the process, produced an output, it had no influence.
Right, okay, that's interesting, thanks. Peter, do you think that the legislation is understood, and do you think that there's enough awareness in the community and in the public authority?
I don't think that legislation is understood or known well about within the community. I happen to know about it because I had an interest in asset transfers in the past and the opportunity that the Act might provide. And then I found, obviously, that there was also the community empowerment element or community participation element to it. And it was after a lot of frustration that we eventually put in our request. Now, Edinburgh has a set of guidelines as to how these requests should be dealt with, but we just haven't found these being followed. It's a very informal process that they seem to follow. You put in an application and then you get a letter back eventually, or an email back saying that there will be a meeting and these will be the people that attend it. We've never had what I understood to be a decision notice, which should be published on the website according to the guidance, but hasn't been. I don't even believe that there is a website that deals with that, or a web page that deals with that. As I say, it's informal. The lead officer in the governance team who started off the process handed it over to a transport officer. This was the DPR on transport issues, so it wasn't exactly an impartial person that was going to lead the process from within the council. Luckily, we have somebody that is dealing with it in a very impartial basis and actually knows the locality, which helps. But basically, it's been handed over from governance to the service that we have the problems with, or had the problems with. So that's not giving us exactly an impartial view. It is just carrying on in that informal way. We are having to write the notes of the meetings, and to get these agreed, we had to develop the process and say what stages we wanted to go through, what the timetable was, etc. Now, my understanding was that that should be done by the public authority to start with, from the guidance, but it's not been a very happy process so far. And I see that the second CPR, the one that's been done jointly, is going through the same initial stages of just a meeting with senior officers, but no set out process or whatever. Whether that will come, we wait to see.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Gail. Andy Whiteman, please.
Thank you very much, Convener, and welcome the panel. I just want to ask Ian and Peter whether you have considered using the asset transfer provisions, and if so, how far you've got. Maybe start with Ian, thank you.
Yeah, we've thought about it. There is a public green space, a really nice public green space beside the biggest, most deprived part of the town, and it's obviously of great social and environmental value. And despite our best efforts, the council for the past 15 years keep zoning it for housing. So we've kind of thought that maybe the best thing to do would be to take an asset transfer, and this has been talked about in the community. And we've got as far as making inquiries, not so much about how to acquire the asset. We had a chat with a couple of people in the local authority, the leader of the council, plus a local councillor, about how to maybe get our hands on the asset. And I've made inquiries with various organisations about how we pay the ongoing costs. That's the worrying thing. The process of acquiring it or getting money to buy it is not the thing that's particularly challenging. It's how on earth do you pay the ongoing costs of owning land. So at the moment, in a very casual way, I'm continuing to make inquiries to try to find the simplest way possible for our community to raise enough money to pay ongoing costs of land ownership.
Okay, thank you. And Peter?
Taking over Council Park car park, but at the moment we're struggling as a community council to get volunteers to do these sort of things. In fact, we even struggle to find members for the community council that will be active and take on a proactive role within the community council. This is surprising perhaps in a community council like ours, but a lot of people are already volunteering with various initiatives in the Kirk, voluntary. I work with giving care to elderly people, working on some of the environmental projects. So to take on more at the moment is perhaps too onerous for us. We would like to do so, but we're also not sure just how, with our experience of working with the council, just how positive it would be to such a request and how much hassle it would give us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Back to Ian. I mean, you're from Stevenston, and of course, Stevenston was arguing since I think 1831 for more power, and eventually became a town council in 1952, and had all that power of licensing and planning and all the rest of it that it managed itself for almost 25 years. I mean, is there an issue here about where power lies? Because you've expressed a degree of frustration about the Community Empowerment Act. I think you said that it allows you to speak, but doesn't really allow you to make any decisions. I mean, do you see that we need to perhaps return to some of the kind of powers that you used to have in the past?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, obviously, when one's doing community projects, one's peers tend to be the older generation, particularly retired people. And of course, people of that age remember Stevenston back in the days when there was a town council. And when the community produces a narrative as to why the town has gone down the tubes over the past few decades, they attribute it almost entirely to the town council vanishing. They think that the fact that decisions are made at the local authority level, where there's 130,000 people, that's the level at which, the most local level of decision making, and local people think that's the reason why the town is so bad, because our local decision making was removed and replaced by decision making by people who have no connection or no real kind of interest in the town's well-being. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
On asset transfer as well, I'm intrigued. I mean, this parcel of land you've sort of been interested in, I mean, what's its history?
Well, that's the thing. It was owned by a landowner, a wealthy landowner, until the 1960s, and then it was sold to Glasgow City Council to be Kerlaw Residential School for young folk. And so Glasgow City Council technically own it. For 15 years, I've been making inquiries about it with them. One of the problems is that an arm's length Quango City Property LLP own it on behalf of Glasgow City Council, and their only remit is profits. That's what they tell me. I've contacted them about, improving the site for the community, protecting it, taking ownership legally, and they say that their only remit as a Quango is to make money, and anything community related doesn't make money. So that's been a problem. So that's the way it's sitting at the moment. It's owned by Glasgow City Council, or rather an arm's length Quango who wants to make as much money. They seem determined. They're marketing it as a development opportunity, and the council, our council, are complicit in that. Despite objections, they keep zoning it for housing, despite the fact they've got 3 times as much housing space as they need, which has kind of forced us to think we really have to try and acquire this land, or else it's going to be lost.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, the committee's heard concerns that, for example, a lot of land that's held by Aloos is not eligible for that transfer because they're not listed as eligible public bodies. I want to talk to you, sorry, this is directed to Ian rather than the other two as well, about, I mean, for example, Stevenson has a common good fund, I think there's £200,000 in it. Do you have any role in managing the fund, or indeed the land that's owned by the fund, or is that all done by the council?
That's all done by the council. There's no role of the community. The community's tried to exert influence over common good land. We've got a couple of small parcels of common good land, one of which was acquired by the community through subscription about 100 years ago, community subscription, and it was to serve the benefit of alleviating suffering and promoting, good things in the community, particularly alleviating suffering. So this piece of land was particularly important to us. It was a building and nice gardens, and we tried to exert influence over it. The council decided to sell it for £15,000 to a property developer. The community launched a campaign, this was a few years ago now, and the campaign failed and the land was sold off, a part of the common good land. So we've tried to exert an influence over common good assets, but we've had no luck.
Okay, thank you. And a question for Mary. I mean, has your experience in taking over public toilets encouraged you to perhaps think more ambitiously about other assets in your community you may take ownership and management of?
Yes. I mean, in the long term, at the minute we're very busy. It's a typical thing of a small number of people involved in it. But yeah, no, we keep thinking of other things that we might like to get onto in the future. But it's a lot of work. So you've got to be cautious that you're not over ambitious, because it does take time to just manage all the paperwork and the actual management. But yeah, no, it has been an experience that makes you think, identify the things that could be improved in the area. That's for sure.
Thank you, that's useful. And finally for for Peter, you mentioned a participation request that you've just begun the process of. I think you said there's 5 community councils involved. Can you say a little bit about how that process came about and how you, how you got together as community councils?
We got together basically because there were some major planning issues. There were major transport issues that affected the whole of North West Edinburgh, So the chair of our community council suggested that they get together with the chairs of all the other community councils. We have had several meetings with the convener of the Transport and Environment Committee, with senior members of Planning and Transport Services, and we just basically were getting nowhere. So at the end of the day, the Queensferry and District Community Council has headed up a joint community participation request, which, as I say, has only just started, so I can't really give a comment on how successful it might be.
Okay, I think it's interesting that you've got together and doing that. That's quite an interesting. I'm very keen on obviously following the progress of that. But just finally, I think I said my last question was finally, but this is finally. Peter, and indeed anyone else who wishes to come back on this. I mean, community councils were created in 1973 mainly as a concession to the 196 town councils that were being abolished, who resented the loss of real power, planning and licensing and things like that. I mean, is there an argument, because you mentioned, Peter, that there's an issue about capacity and volunteer time. Is there an argument in considering giving community councils more statutory powers so that they could have proper income through taxes, employ professional people, and thereby increase the capacity of the community to do useful things?
It may be possible at a community council level. It might be better at, say, a locality level, bringing together several of the local authorities, several of the community councils, sorry. I'm not sure that our community council alone would have the resources and the strength to be able to do that. I think one of the important points on the community asset transfers, as well as what you're talking about, is that the money would need to come with them for some of the services that the community might take over, or some of the assets that it might take over. For example, there's not really a lot of reason why a community would want to take over a large car park without getting funding to do so from the council that was responsible for it. I can see it for some of the more attractive things that one might take over, say it was open space or allotments or whatever. That would be more attractive to take over and perhaps to raise funds for. But when you're just talking about toilets or car parks, important as they may be, they don't have the appeal perhaps for a community to start fundraising to look after them. I'm not sure that totally answers your question.
That's very helpful, and unless Ian or Mary want to come in on that, that's me concluded, convener.
Please, Keith Brown.
Convener, there's a lot of ground covered there. I won't take as long with these questions. I've got one question really for each of the panel. First to Peter, if I could. I last lived in Cramond about 45 years ago, and the issue then was traffic management. It was when they changed the flight path across the Edinburgh Airport, which went right above our house at the time. I just wondered whether, I understand why community councils will be very focused on the local council, which is, very central to what community councils do. It establishes them and it establishes the scheme for their establishment and so on. But the Act does allow for participation requests with other public bodies, and I wondered if that's ever anything. I don't know how relevant it'd be to the particular issues that you've raised. I don't know whether, for example, LRT would be classified as a public body, but are there any other public bodies that you've ever considered looking at participation requests with?
I think we're very early in the process, that we're only beginning to realise the scope that the Act provides in terms of community participation requests. And it's not really until we see whether the process works that we'll decide whether we take on more. I mean, we really see it as a process of last resort. And one would hope that we didn't have to go down that route, that we managed to get the levels of engagement and the outcomes that we're looking at before we went through that means of last resort, as I say.
Yeah, so I did say just one question, but if I could just follow that up. I mean, many of your answers have been about frustrations with the local authority, and we've had previously a number of recommendations which might help. One is the perennial one of saying there should be a culture change in the approach to, in this case, community empowerment. Now, I worked in local government for 20 years. I think culture change can be very aspirational but difficult thing to achieve. Would it be more beneficial to have, do you think, in your experience, one person had responsibility for making sure that the authority responded in the correct way? They did the minutes of meetings and that kind of thing. If one person had that central responsibility?
Yes, it would. Yeah.
Thanks very much. If I can ask Ian a question. In response to a previous question, you'd said that how powerless that you felt and all the power was with the local authority. And then that it would be good to go back to how it was before. I assume that in looking for that kind of authority, that power to be devolved further down, whether through a reorganisation of local government, you're talking about to an elected body, not necessarily to a conservation body like your own, or am I getting that wrong?
Oh no, I don't think that, I mean, a body like ourselves, or a small community group that does environmental projects, it would be quite odd, I think, if we were given any genuine carte blanche power. I think certainly, a lower level of elected representation would be something which would make an awful lot of sense. But you can give, community organisations like ourselves power via other means, I guess, albeit on a case-by-case basis. If there was some powerful body that sat separate from county councils that could liaise with community bodies to give them power when needed. I had mentioned in a previous answer that if a community organisation or a community movement is at odds with the council on an issue, it would be good to have some independent body that has power. So on that particular issue, they could give power to the community, whether it's a small group or a big group, take it away from the council, give it to the community on an issue-by-issue basis.
Yeah, and apologies again, I know this would be one question, but just to follow that up, your particular issues with what you called a quango, which I think the council might call an alio, but it doesn't really matter what the language is. Do you think one of the improvements might be to bring those kind of bodies more directly into the remit of the Community Empowerment Act, or to strengthen the arm of organisations like yourself in relation to arm's length organisations like that?
Well, I agree. We've only had one sort of dealing with one scenario where we've encountered arm's length bodies, and that's been this one I mentioned. And yeah, it's very frustrating. I mean, definitely in the context of that particular issue, it would be 1,000 times more helpful if the quango wasn't there, and if Glasgow City Council had owned and managed their own assets on this occasion.
Thanks very much. And my last question to Mary was really about, it seems you've got the most clear-cut and positive experience, but I just wondered, having taken control of the public convenience, would you think that, without putting too much on it, it's really the feeling of empowerment you'll have had from taking that decision, from action being taken, a local facility being protected, that's led to a sense, a more intangible thing I suppose, but a sense of empowerment in the community. They can see that they've taken action and that it's worked for them in the way that they wanted it to. Do you feel that in itself helps to empower local communities?
Yes, I mean that's one of the best things about it was that so these toilets are in the middle of the village. They were abandoned. People were misusing them when they were closed. We took them over, and within a matter of weeks, we started to see a sort of rekindling of the community spirit in the village. We weren't expecting it, but it was there. People were turning up to fundraising activities that had never done so before, and it has in a small way. I mean, it's a tiny village, but in a small way, it has brought a bit of life back into it, and then the neighbouring village. It's a very rural spread community. Hence, we need the public toilets. And yeah, other villages are now sort of doing the same. We've been invited to talk to other community groups about their toilets. So it is sort of spreading. Yeah, it's it's a slow process, but a very good one, I think.
Great, thanks very much for that. That's me, convener.
Thank you very much, Keith. And finally, Alexander.
Thank you very much indeed, convener, and good morning, panel. It's very obvious that each and every one of you on the panel today are very much the community champions that we've seen in the engagement we've had with other organisations around when the committee have taken on board these views. And you want this act and you want empowerment to take place because it enables you as communities to feel ownership and responsibility. But there's no question you have today echoed many of the fears we've heard already about the frustration, the lack of communications, even at times the lack of respect that seems to have happened at times between officials and yourselves at the community level. So can I ask each of the panel to think about what more the Scottish Government and public bodies could do to ensure that there is real empowerment? Because I would see, and what I've heard today, there seems to be an element of empowerment, but that empowerment is not what you as community champions see, want or need to ensure that you can have a successful asset transfer or you can have a successful participation. So maybe Peter, if you want to answer first.
I think perhaps in terms of empowerment and engagement, the problems start at the top. That we find that even when we go to the conveners of committees, we don't get heard properly. So that if the leadership, both at the elected member level and at the officer level, is not giving the lead to junior officers, then we're not going to get the change in culture that we're.
No, I think I'm the only person left that people can actually see and hear. Apologies, we seem to have some connection problems, so we're just going to suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes to see if we can figure out what's happening. Thank you.
Okay, apologies for the technical glitch there. Back to Alexander. Alexander, do you want to take off from where you finished off?
Yes, thank you. Peter, I think you were trying to explain, my question was with reference to what the Scottish Government and what other public bodies should be doing to support that engagement.
Sorry, do you want me to speak without seeing me, or?
Yes,
I'm told you can't see me.
Yeah, as long as we can hear you, that's the main thing.
Well, that's right. That's probably better that way. No, sorry, I'm not sure just how much you heard of what I was saying. I was basically saying that I think the change in culture needs to come from the top of the organisation, that we found that even when we engage with the conveners of committees or with senior officers, we're not really getting the level of engagement that we want or the time that is needed to take on board what we're saying to them. They seem to listen, or to hear, but not to listen. And in fact, I'm not sure how many of you have actually read the Best Value report from the Accounts Committee that's gone through. It's basically saying that Edinburgh Partnership and the Council do not have a community engagement strategy in place. And I think that's very accurate assessment, because that's certainly the impression that we get.
Thank you. If Ian maybe wants to give his impressions of that, are they similar?
Yeah, I think so. I'd say the broad problem with things like participation requests is that they don't give any power. All they do is they encourage engagement, but there's a difference between engagement and empowerment. I think communities are engaged. They're engaged to death by councils. There's engagement all the time, but there's no power. So I think a distinction needs to be made between increasing engagement and increasing power. Participation requests increase engagement, but they don't increase power as far as I can see.
And Mary?
Being, if you like, respected and listened to, we had a very contrasting experience. We, as I say, we found the Highland Council very, very receptive. I think for me, what's needed is a lot of work. You know, we started off as interested individuals, had to set up a company, had to register at Companies House. You know, massively steep learning curve, which we enjoyed. It was a very fulfilling journey, but we need more organisations or strengthen organisations like COS. What service? I mean, they were fantastic, but there is so much to learn and so much to do. My worry is you could end up with a proliferation of just small organisations like us. Is that the best way forward? So we've enjoyed it. It's been fantastic. We're, you know, ambitious for the future, but it's that next level down. In the Highlands, I think, you know, we're lucky. We've got that dedicated CAT team who are brilliant, but it's then the next stage where we need the support and the help and the advice. We were lucky we got it and we had the skill set to deal with it. But I think there must be a lot of opportunities where that skill set isn't necessarily there.
And I think you've all identified that you have the enthusiasm, you have the energy, you want to be involved, and then you get so far, and then there is that frustration, there is that lack of support, or you're dismissed, or you believe that your abilities don't seem to match what the community and what the council and what the officials want to take place. So can I ask Mary, especially because you seem to have had a reasonably good experience of all of that, Mary, what you think made the difference for you? Was it just that personal contact, or was there some kind of strategy, or was there an overarching ability within your own organisation and the people that you crossed over and met with to ensure that took place? Because it would appear that from what you're saying, that did take place, but others do not seem to have that same good experience.
I think all of those really, you've got to preface this with the fact that stick in the press for closing toilets, and we were opening a set of toilets. So, you know, we were on the same side basically, and you know that I think colours a lot of what happened to us. But yeah, it was the if you like the listening and the human touch of the CAT team. We are lucky that we had the small group that we formed. We had the time, the skill set, the determination. So yeah, it sort of fell into place for us. But I think it was almost a unique combination. I don't know how often that's going to be matched. I mean, in fairness, the Highland Council have asked if they can give our details to other people they get approached by with the view to asset transfers. They've asked if we will they can contact us for advice. But yeah, it is a sort of a unique combination that we were lucky to have.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, convener. I know time is pressing.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexander. And that completes today's evidence session. Can I thank the panel for taking time out to speak with us today and raising some very interesting issues for our inquiry. Members of the panel can leave the meeting by pressing the red telephone icon, and I remind committee members that they remain in public for the next item. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is consideration of negative instrument 366 as listed on the agenda. I refer members to paper number 3. The instrument is laid under the negative procedure, which means that its provisions will come into force unless the Parliament agrees to a motion to annul it. No motions to annul have been laid. Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument on 24th of November 2020 and determined that it did not need to draw the attention of the Parliament to the instrument on any grounds within its remits. Do members have any comments on the instrument? Sarah?
Thank you, Convener. I was looking at it to think of what the potential types of use this proposal could be made for, and then I heard the announcements about the vaccine this morning, and I'm guessing that it's about infrastructure for things like rollout of testing and vaccines. So I think it's an important piece of subordinate legislation. I'm very interested to see it in front of us today, and we'll look forward to scrutinising its impact in the future. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, in that case, my apologies, everyone's a wee bit haywire today. I invite the committee to agree that it does not wish to make any further recommendations in relation to this instrument. Are we agreed? Okay, thank you, that is agreed. And that concludes the public part of this meeting, and we will resume the meeting in private in Microsoft Teams. I propose we resume the meeting in 5 minutes. Please accept the clerk's meeting request for the private discussion, which will be sent shortly. You can exit the meeting by clicking on the red telephone icon. See you soon.